You this afternoon has to do with the creation that government promised a special prosecutor's office. The government has promised that it will set up the special prosecutor's office to prosecute public officials by the end of 2017. Speaking at a Transparency International regional meeting in Accra, the Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, said that government will ensure a special prosecutor's office to be created to help fight corruption. But the issue of the creation of that special office has become a controversial one, as some have argued that no special office created to fight corruption will be effective if the Attorney General's position is not decoupled from the Ministry of Justice. This is because whatever work is under the present constitution, it would end up on the desk of the Attorney General. So unless you amend the constitution to take the powers that are granted the Attorney General from whoever is playing that position, it will be an exercise in futility. And we want to pick some legal thoughts on it. But before that, I mean, we are pretty much aware of what the promise is. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, the President of the Republic, made that promise sometime in August during the campaign. And we just want to, refresh your memory on some of the key things he said. One of it is that it will be established by an act of parliament, so that he has recognized. Also indicating that it will be independent of the executive, so there is not going to be any direct authority from the executive, and they are going to be solely independent. And it's going to be set up to prosecute and investigate allegations of corruption. And yesterday, the Vice President said that they are looking at concluding or finishing it up by the end of the year. So those are the key issues that were raised during the campaign, and it seems that already steps are in place to start the establishment of such an office. We would want to speak to a legal mind, Ace Ankoma, who is, well known countrywide as one person who has been an anti-corruption advocate and also a member of the Occupy Ghana institution. Mr. Ankoma, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
All right, to start with, there's been back and forth about the necessity of the office that the President has promised to create. That is the Office of the Special Prosecutor. And people say they agree that we need such an office, but there are some legalities surrounding it that may not be allowed. What is your initial thought on it?
Ultimately, if we have an independent prosecution office, whatever we call it, the Attorney General's office, separate, linked, delinked, that independent prosecutor's office will be the ideal. We do not think that the history of this country justifies having the executive exerting or exercising any control over the power to prosecute crime. I think that there's a fair amount of acceptance on that. So whether it comes from decoupling one office from the other is another story. But I think that there's a fair amount of agreement that we need that the person who takes decisions on prosecutions be not the same person who serves on cabinet and takes instructions from the president.
Right, but do you foresee any kind of overlap role between that of the Attorney General and this particular office the President is promising to create?
I was coming to that. Under Article 88, prosecutions are the responsibility of the Attorney General. Nobody can bypass that until we change Article 88, 3 and 4. But it also says that prosecutions are commenced in the name of the Republic, but at the suit of the Attorney General or persons the Attorney General has duly authorized. And so it is possible for someone to commence criminal prosecution, but based on the authorization of the Attorney General. And so between now and when we finally decide to take the power of prosecution from the executive, I think that this is what we need to exploit, that the Attorney General will authorize a special prosecutor to prosecute specific corruption crimes. That will be constitutional. And I must add that the Attorney General authorizing people by law to prosecute actually already exists in the public prosecutors who are appointed under Section 56 of Act 30 and in the law officers who are appointed under Section 1 of the Law Officers Act, NRCD 279. The only problem is that all of these are still specifically subject to the direction and control of the Attorney General. What we can have is a policy decision that when it comes to the special prosecutor, the Attorney General is going to allow the person as much independence as is legally possible to do what he or she has to do under the law.
And is that legally possible? Is that legally possible?
It is legally possible. The law says that the person can commence prosecution. A decision to step in to interfere in prosecution is a decision of the Attorney General. And the Attorney General, without telling Ghanaians that that's what she's going to do, can decide that when they come to this office, I'm going to allow that office as much real independence as possible. So there may not be formal independence because that would be difficult under the Constitution. But the Attorney General can afford to have the person, can allow to have the person to have substantial independence to do what they ought to do. Look, it's very simple. It is almost as if an official of the Attorney General's office is prosecuting an offense, and the Attorney General takes a decision that, look, I'm going to leave this prosecutor to do his or her work with precious little interference from me. That is absolutely doable under the law.
Right. My final question to you would have to do with the fact that when it has, I think the major concern has always had to do with the prosecution of cases that have government interest, you know, state institutions and persons either in government or connected whatsoever to government. Do you think that the independent prosecutor can be able to, you know, take up such a challenge and deliver as expected?
Well, my personal preference would be to start calling this office the Special Prosecutor's Office instead of the Independent Prosecutor's Office, because it seems to be fudge and cloud the description a little bit. It's just a name, but we need to look at that. Look, the sweetness of the pudding is in the eating of it. And whoever is going to accept this position is going to be appointed to this position, ought to have sufficient spine to do what the policy decision behind the law that we expect to be passed was passed to achieve. The person ought to be able to do it. The sweetness of the pudding is in the eating of it. If the MPP haven't promised that this person will have substantive independence to do the work, then starts interfering and dictating to the person, the MPP would have failed in the campaign promise. We can hold their legs to the fire because they have failed. So I believe that we should start it and see how it works out. And it might be a good ground to see how a completely independent office that prosecutes crime will operate if and when we get to amending the Constitution.
All right. Mr. Ankoma, we are grateful for your time and thank you very much for your thoughts on this particular development. But I mean, I'm sure that even on social media, you have seen some of the comments people are making about it. There seems to be an agreement, but it is the execution of it that people are quite concerned about. And if, for instance, maybe the Ministry of Attorney General is decoupled, as many have called for, do you think then that the nomenclature of it can be given to this special prosecutor when we just have an Attorney General, then the Ministry of Justice and seeking justice will be given to this special prosecutor?
Well, it's in the name. It's a name thing. And as I've emphasized, the issue is not really what we call the Attorney General or the Minister of Justice. To or be subject to executive control and direction. Okay. So have your Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Just that, take that power to prosecute crime away from that office and give it to somebody else. If it means it being only with an Attorney General and the Minister for Justice doing all the other things that the department does, so be it. Historically, they were not the same. In 1957, the Attorney General's office was separate from the Ministry of Justice. But we subsequently in 1960 blended the two. And although both in 1968 and 1978, the commissions that put the Constitution together recommended the decoupling, somehow the politicians have not done it. This is a very good test situation. Let's see if this government would take this a step further than both the Progress Party at the time and the People's National Party that won the election at the time and the government that existed before that. Let's see whether this government can do what all previous governments since 1960 have been afraid to do. The sweetness of the food is in the eating of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much once again, and always a pleasure sharing your company. Ace Nkrumah is a legal practitioner and known quite strongly about his views about anti-corruption. This is still Midday Live on TV3. We are staying on this particular topic a while longer. We've been joined on the line by Franklin Cudjoe. He is the executive chair or executive president of Imani Ghana and founding president, actually. And I would want to pick his thoughts on it. Mr. Cudjoe, thank you for joining us. Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure, my friend. Good afternoon.
Great. In all seriousness, how independent do you think that the office of the independent prosecutor would be?
Well, it will depend, first of all, on the mandate, the terms of reference that comes with his job, and secondly, the person who would occupy the position. I think these two largely will determine how independent he is. But let me just add that in addition to his the terms of reference, it would also mean that if he has the needed resources and the staff to work with, and this in itself must be guaranteed. Otherwise, clearly speaking, he wouldn't be as independent as we would like him to be. So the question of independence is one of the terms of reference, the fact that he probably needs to stay clear of what I will call interference from the government, because there could be scenarios where a government person or a party person probably will be caught up in a corruption web and might have to be prosecuted. How does he navigate? How does he or she navigate that? Would depend solely on what terms of reference he has to work with, and indeed the powers, as in the resources and the capability of his staff.
The biggest bane for many a government has always had to do with financial issues. Maybe some contract signed illegally or some items, acquired through dubious means. So there's always the issue of financial either misappropriation or abuse. Do you think that is what the focus of this special prosecutor should be, or they can look at other issues not necessarily related to corruption and financial malfeasance?
My understanding of the justification for the office of the special prosecutor is actually in the name, special prosecutor. So specially designed to prosecute certain type or categories of crimes that will require, some special attention away from the government business, which ordinarily the Attorney General would have dealt with. So for me, that is my understanding. But you asked a critical question, and I like to also hazard another answer, why we think that, having a special prosecutor is one thing, but indeed dealing with the institutional nature of corruption is also another. Because you see, we should be also interested in ensuring that these things do not happen in the first place. Even though we do like the idea, it will be interesting to know that the institutions we have are able to prevent corruption. So the procurement processes must also be looked at.
All right, Mr. Cudjoe, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for speaking to us. He is the founding president of Imani Ghana, a policy think tank. We would want to stay on this particular topic because we know that the NPP is the government of the day, and they have promised to ensure that we have such an office in place. Ibrahim Ajay is a member of the NPP and also part of their communication team, was quite active during the campaign period. Congratulations to you and the NPP for coming into office.
Thank you,
Let's zero in on the topic of the creation of the special office of the prosecutor. What were the considerations? Is it because as a nation and over the years we've been unable to deal decisively with corruption, for which reason the NPP thinks that let's create such an office, or there is an agenda behind it? We want to know.
It's the Good afternoon, again, Martin, to our viewers on TV3. It's the first one. I think that everybody in that political space in Ghana and those who are not politically active can readily identify that for all the 4 republics that Ghana has enjoyed, corruption has been a cancer in our body politic. And how to deal with it has been the $64 million question, whereby there can be a transparency. It's not about doing the right thing, but being seen to be doing the right thing in terms of corruption. And I think as a manifesto pledge, this is something that I believe the people of Ghana have, if you will, partnered with President Akufo-Addo in terms of as a pledge to make sure that we can bring transparency to that area of public corruption. Because the special prosecutor, the main remit is to deal with corruption within the public sector.
Okay.
And I think it's something that's...
There's the school of thought that the current administration, yes, clearly is against issues of corruption, but probably wants to deal decisively with previous administrations, for which reason you want to set this up. How do you allay fears of persons with this kind of thought, and then also give the assurance that it is supposed to be something that will deal across board with anybody who falls short of expectations?
Ace mentioned something earlier, Martin. If we in government, the MPP, doesn't do what we said we'll do, then you'll put our feet to the fire. And how do you allay the fears? You allay the fears of anybody thinking there's this witch hunt, you're being biased, by actually doing the spirit and the letter of what our manifesto pledge was to do, to bring somebody who's independent of government, independent of the ruling party, to actually prosecute without fear nor favor. And I think that has been the bane of all the republics, because the person who's been appointed there at some point or other, whether in fact they act judiciously with all the fiduciary protocols that attach monetary issues, people say, oh, as for him, is a party in power. How can we disabuse people's minds by actually doing what we're saying we're going to do and make sure that it is independent of the government of the day, of the executive?
And finally, the setting up, at what point are we going to see action in that regard? The Vice President yesterday said that by the end of the year, for instance, they are going to ensure that we pass a right to information bill and also other related promises that have to do with attempts to fight corruption. At what point are we going to start seeing action?
Well, the timeline has been given to be this particular year. I'm talking the special prosecutor. So by December 2017, it should be done. And I'm sure an LI, a legal instrument, will be laid before Parliament in due course. This is something that President Akufo-Addo is mindful of. We want to do it expeditiously, but in a way in which all protocols are properly observed, so that all the legal requirements are properly taken care of. Honorable Haruna Idrisu mentioned in an earlier press statement that it is not constitutional. He's saying that there are certain executive elements of the Constitution which are entrenched. But Article 88(4), and if you allow me to read, which is what Ace mentioned. Yes. Article 88(4) of the Constitution reads, all offences prosecuted in the name of the Republic of Ghana shall be at the suit of the Attorney General or, this is the word, or any other person authorized by him in accordance with the law. So this again, if somebody thinks that you cannot do this, Article 88(4) gives you that space, that power to actually delegate that authority to somebody who is independent of the executive. And when we do that, I believe you'll see equity coming back to our public expenditure. You would recall that I asked Ace and then also Franklin Kujo about the belief that this outfit is going to be totally independent of the executive and the government of the day. I mean, there are those who are saying that maybe Martin Amidu should be made that special independent prosecutor because he is NDC known and then also seem to have just hit the NDC hard with issues regarding corruption. What is the assurance from the side of government also that really the person is going to be as neutral as possible and deal, fairly with everybody that, falls foul of the law? I think one way to achieve that is to have somebody who's not known to be party A or party B. Yes, we know Martin Amidu's NDC, but again, his political DNA over the last few years has shown that he puts Ghana first. More national than... More nationalistic or national interest than party interest. And I think that's the way to go. I cannot sit here and say that's the person, and we leave that within. There's a process to be followed here.
Right.
But you asked Ace a question, and also Franklin. How can we be sure that it will be truly independent? Here's a case you can look back to the history of the NPP. The Bank Act of 2002. What did that do? It removed the ability from the Minister of Finance to set interest rates. Under President Kufuor, it was laid in 2001 and passed in 2002. And the Bank of Ghana now had the sole authority to set interest rates. So there's no interfering. And for the whole tenure of the 8 years of President Kufuor, the Bank of Ghana was never told to set the monetary policy rate, you know. And so I'm just giving that as an indication that the NPP, under His Excellency President Akufo-Addo, will do what it means and means what it sets out to do. And so they will be truly independent. And we're living in an era now whereby we are proactive in terms of our politics. Once you go wrong, social media will put you to will take you on. And President Akufo-Addo's concern is to make sure that we bring equity in the public sector. It's about protecting the public purse. How can we do that? Give the public the confidence that you have somebody who is not attached to the executive, who will be the policeman,
and
so to speak.
And be very neutral.
And very neutral.
With it.
And I believe we'll do it.
All right, so that's it for this particular segment. Thank you very much again, Ibrahim
Martin, thank you.
And he is a communications member of the New Patriotic Party, and would ensure that we get to the bottom of this and keep an eye on the president's development as and when the person is named. TV3 would bring it to you. This is still Midday Live on TV3.